All right, so let's talk about Elizabeth Warren and her CNN town hall. Went a little bit over an hour. I was surprised. They actually let her go. I think it was like an hour and 15 minutes. They asked her a lot of questions. She hit on a lot of hot button topics. First of all, let's start with her stance on Medicare for all. Now, when I first was watching the town hall, I felt like she wasn't answering really any questions. Her initial answers seemed to be a lot of, we're going to talk about it. We'll just talk about it. When they would press her for some details, she'd say, well, we're going to get together. We're going to have conversations about it. And the thing I don't like about that with many of the politicians, a lot of them do this whole, well, we're going to get together and we're going to have conversations. And that's what I'm going to do when I'm president. That is not leadership to me. That is mediating. And that is not what I want the president of the United States to be. I'm not looking to elect a mediator. I'm looking to elect a leader. So when you're a politician who keeps saying, we're going to get together and talk about it, I just feel like, no, the president of the United States needs to be a visionary. The president of the United States needs to have answers. The president of the United States needs to lead. And the president of the United States needs to corral everybody else into that vision. And if you don't have a vision and instead your idea is, well, we're just going to all get together and talk, I don't know where that leads you. That doesn't really lead you anywhere. What we know is what works are real visionaries, real leaders. So in the beginning with her CNN town hall, I wasn't all that impressed. It was a lot of, we're going to get together and talk about it. But this was her answer when she was pressed by Jake Tapper. So she was asked by an audience member about Medicare for all. She basically said there's a lot of options. First, she said she wants to get rid of, she wants to stop the Republicans from trying to dismantle the ACA. She wants to strengthen the current system. Secondly, she said she wants to reduce the cost of prescription drugs. And then she went on and said, now regarding Medicare for all, there's a lot of options. So Jake Tapper hit back, and this is what he asked her.
So you are a co-sponsor of Senator Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All bill. And I understand there are a lot of different paths to universal coverage. But his bill that you've co-sponsored would essentially eliminate private insurance. Is that something you could support?
He's got a runway for that. I think we get everybody together, and that's what it is. We'll decide. I've also co-sponsored other bills.
Okay, so that was basically, we're going to get together and we'll talk about it. We'll decide. She was pressed a little bit more, and she did say that what she thinks she would like to do is lower the Medicare age to 60, 55, or 50. She says that helps cover people who are most at risk. But she also suggested the possibility, as some activists have discussed, for starting with younger Americans. She says some people say, do it the other way. Let's bring it up from everybody under 30 gets covered by Medicare. She also signaled her willingness to back plans, many of them already baked into legislation from her colleagues in Washington, that will allow people to buy into public programs if they don't want to be covered by the private insurance offered by their employers. She says, quote, for me, what's key is we get everybody at the table on this, she said. So once again, let's just get together and talk. We're going to talk about it. We already know what works and what doesn't work. This getting together and talking isn't going to work because the insurance lobby is powerful and massive, and they're going to make sure that they get to everybody first and that they're going to be greasing their pockets. And one thing that Elizabeth Warren has already said previously was that even though right now she's trying to fundraise and not take PAC money and not take well, basically, she says that when it comes to the general election, if she gets the nomination, that all bets are off, that she'll take money from anywhere and everywhere. So you don't think the insurance lobby is going to get to her, especially since she's already wishy-washy on Medicare for all? She backed Sanders' bill, but now she's saying, well, but, there's a lot of ways to get to the same end goal. Not really. Actually, not really. Not if you want to do it effectively. There's really only single payer. You can have a little bit of a mixed market in there. There are some examples of this, like in Germany, they do have single payer, and then if you do make over a certain amount, you do have to buy into the programs. You have to pay for the programs, but I actually think I don't think they're private insurance. I'd have to actually look more into that, and I'm not prepared right now for that. But I will, in the future, I will do a show on that. I will look at all the various different medical systems in the Western world and in some of the Asian countries, the stuff that works, and, we'll pick it apart. I'll do that. Just not right now. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the other hot button topics that Elizabeth Warren hit on. I really liked this answer in particular when she was talking about raising the minimum wage working in America. She first shared her story about being raised in Oklahoma, her father having a heart attack, her mother having to go to work and support the family, and how difficult that was. And that was really left an impression on Elizabeth Warren. And she goes on to say this.
When this happened to my family, the minimum wage in America would support a family of 3. It would take care of a mortgage, utilities, and put food on the table. Today in America, a full-time minimum wage job will not keep a mama and a baby out of poverty. I am in this fight because I believe that is wrong.
Yeah. I really like that about Elizabeth Warren. I like that she's fighting the corruption, that she's fighting the system. I like her stance here on minimum wage. This is abhorrent. This is not what America's supposed to be about. You know, when people say, well, it's because you're lazy and you're getting handouts and that's why, and that is just not true. The system has failed people. It used to be, like Elizabeth Warren said, when she was young and her mom went out and got a minimum wage job, she could at least pay the bills. And nowadays, that is not possible. Nowadays, minimum wage jobs are for high school kids. It's kind of like getting an allowance. That's how little the amount of money is. It's like, well, you know, high school kids get minimum wage jobs. Well, no, actually in our economy, people who have to pay mortgages and have to feed families need to get minimum wage jobs. And it is an absolute crisis in America that our minimum wage jobs do not support a small family, which it should. It should support mom and dad, 2 or 3 kids. That's what a minimum wage job should support. It should be basic. Now, you're not going to be living rich. You're going to be scraping by. It's going to be tough, but you should be able to do it. And you can't in America right now. That's why people are supporting living wages. She does hit on some really hot topics and stuff that I've talked about before. But let's go ahead and start with the Electoral College.
Well, my view is that every vote matters. And the way we can make that happen is that we can have national voting, and that means get rid of the Electoral College and every vote.
I'm still not on board with this, guys. I'm not. First of all, getting rid of the Electoral College is nearly impossible to do. So you would have to amend the Constitution, which is very, very difficult. You're not going to get the conservative states on board with this because the Electoral College, the system, the reason why so many Democrats want to get rid of it is because Gore lost to Bush and Clinton lost to Trump. So the conservative states are not going to be on board with this. And you need 2/3 of the states to be on board. Or you need to call a constitutional convention, which, believe me, you do not want to do. Because anything goes in a constitutional convention. You do not want one of those. The last one was in, 1787? And basically an entire new government was formed. An entire new governing document was written. You don't want to go down that road. And amending the Constitution is difficult, and you're not going to be able to do it without the support of conservative states, and they're just not going to do it. So even having the conversation, it's kind of dangerous because it's almost like you're trying to promise something you're just not going to be able to deliver. Now, some states have said, well, we're going to make sure that our electorates that our votes go to whoever wins the popular vote. But those are all liberal states who typically always turn blue. So you got to get way more on board. Secondly, now, I've done a show on the Electoral College before. I know that many of you want to get rid of it. But here's the thing, and I understand the sentiment of one person, one vote. I totally understand. I felt that way too. I was very much against the Electoral College. I wanted to get rid of it myself until I did more research, until I did more thinking of the consequences of this. And if we want to stay one big, great nation of 50 states, we really can't get rid of it because taxation without representation leads to civil war. People get their heads cut off for that kind of thing. And if you're going to leave the small states with small populations who are largely supporting the country with their agriculture, then you're going to really see a problem. And I know that a lot of people say, well, the Electoral College was rooted in racism. I don't agree with that. I think it was rooted in agriculture. Now, it just happens to be that back in the day, the agriculture was run plantations, and they were slave owners. Because back in the day, we still do this today. We rely on cheap labor for our agriculture. That's why we've got so many undocumented workers on the farms. And it keeps prices low, and it's immoral. It leaves workers without rights. It leaves them in poor working conditions. They don't have any recourse if something bad happens to them because they're undocumented. It's a bad situation. We're still doing it today. And we did it back in the 1700s and the 1800s, where we had people working on farms with very few rights. Now, the people working on our farms today also cannot vote. They're undocumented. So it's a similar situation. You've got representation you've got people without representation who are doing the hard labor of America. That being said, the reason why those states were able to get so much voting power was because they said to the big states that had all the cities, they said, listen, we're your agricultural hub. We're the ones supporting the agriculture in the nation. And we need to have a voice at the table because you can't ice out the farmers. That's really what it came down to. It was agriculture. And I know everybody wants to kind of look at history from today's lens, through today's lens at history. You just can't do that. You have to try your best to import yourself to the thinking of the time. They weren't thinking because we're monsters and we just want to subjugate these people. That is why we want to, better silence that thing, right? We just heard that. Sorry about that. They weren't thinking like that. What they were thinking was, we want representation because we're your agricultural hub. That is the same thing for many of the states today. They're saying, look, we're giving you resources one way or another, be it agriculture or other things that they're bringing resources to the table. And we can't be iced out of the conversation. So we need representation at the table. You have to look at the Electoral College like this. Instead of one vote, one person, think of it one community, one vote. So you've got mega metropolis New York with 20 million people, and you've got Denver, and I'm even citing big cities, but now if you take all the agricultural cities and all the small mining towns, it takes a lot of them to equal the number in New York. In order to get 20 million of these small towns, you need a lot of them, hundreds of these towns, in order to equate to the size of New York. So now you've got one community, New York. I get it, it's a large community, but you've got one community controlling the fate of hundreds of other communities. That means one vote from one major metropolitan center ends up ruling and overruling the vote of hundreds of other little communities. That is the way you've got to kind of look at the Electoral College. So that's that. Now, so I still am not sold on getting rid of the Electoral College. I'm still holding firm. I think that taxation without representation, guys, is problematic. And I also don't think that we should be pissing off the agricultural hubs of the nations. We do need them. And by the way, in California, where I live, the agricultural areas of California vote red. So it really is a thing. We have to have it takes all of us to make this nation work. Now, here's what she said on reparations.
So I believe it's time to start the national, full-blown conversation about reparations in this country. And that means I support the bill in the House to appoint a congressional panel of experts, of people who are studying this, who talk about different ways we may be able to do it, and to make a report back to Congress so that we can, as a nation, do what's right and begin to heal. Thank you. Thank you.
Senator, if I could just follow up on George's question. You've said you're open to a conversation about reparations to the descendants of slaves and also to Native Americans. You also said, might that include direct payments, direct financial transfer of money?
So there are a lot of ways to think about how reparations should be formed. And I notice Georgia's question actually started with just the frame of an apology, right? With the frame of a national recognition. We have a lot of experts around the country, a lot of activists who have a whole lot of different approaches to it. And I think the best we can do right now, I love the idea of this congressional commission. Let's bring people together and let's open that conversation as Americans. Let's see what ideas people want to put on the table and let's talk them through. Because I got to tell you, ignoring the problem is not working.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with her on this. I've had many conversations with many people about reparations. I've got a lot of questions about it because there is just really no agreement. Even amongst Black folks, they are not agreeing on what exactly they would like to see, who would be involved in the reparations. Some say, no, you've got to be a direct descendant of slaves. Others say, no, if you're Black, that should be enough because the system is against you, the systemic problems. Others say, yeah, I mean, there just doesn't seem to be a lot of agreement. And I do think that having a panel, having a group of experts study it and talk about it is probably a good way to go. But I do think that we would have to, whatever they come back with, we would have to really assess, because they might come back and say, look, we think that just fixing the systemic issues and fixing them for all people who are poor would be the fix. Or they might come back and say, yeah, we need to have paychecks that are cut because there's inheritances that are due. There's a lot that I just have so many questions when it comes to reparations. And clearly Elizabeth Warren does as well. She's not giving any clear-cut answers. Now, a lot of people, they rip up Bernie Sanders about this because he says, no, he's not for reparations. He does believe that the classism in America is the fix, that a disproportionately number of Black people are poor. And so, therefore, if you fix the system, then the people who will be most helped would disproportionately be whoever is poor. And if that is disproportionately Black folks, then that's who disproportionately is going to be helped by the system when it's fixed. So a lot of people get on his case about that. But what is Elizabeth Warren really saying? She's not saying, yeah, I believe in X, Y, Z. She just says, let's talk about it. It's more of this, let's get together and talk about it. And I think that's fair enough. I think Bernie Sanders could at least say, yeah, okay, we can talk about it. We can explore it. We can, maybe see what we can do and what's feasible and, what actually would work. More importantly, what's actually going to work? What's going to be the most effective thing to do? So actually, if you want to hear a conversation about reparations, I do have a podcast that I do with a co-host once a week called The Left. It's where different factions of the left get together and hash it out. I, of course, represent the progressive side. And last week, we actually had Nico House on, who is another progressive voice here on YouTube. He's got a great show, and he is a big advocate for reparations. And him and I had a pretty tense and intense, I should say, conversation about reparations. And I will put that link to that podcast down below. Okay. Coming up here, let's talk about Chelsea Clinton. She has been accused of being responsible for the attack in New Zealand and Islamophobia. But is she? That is coming up.